You're listening to All the Kings Men, the official podcast of the LA Kings. Now, here's your host, Jesse Cohen.
All right, joining us again, Finnish hockey expert Andrew Epps. How are you doing today, Andrew?
I'm good. How are you? Thanks for having me back.
And today's an odd one because we're talking about Ján Chovan, which is how I'm choosing to pronounce it until I'm told otherwise, who is not actually Finnish. He's from Slovakia, but he played in Finland in a league that I'm not necessarily sure I understand. So if you could start us off by explaining why I chose to talk to you about this Slovakian kid, that would be helpful.
Yeah. So got a lot of experience in the hockey system over there in Finland. It is certainly, I've written some articles in my Substack that kind of explain the confusing system. If you're a North American viewer only, even mainly Euro only viewer, the Finnish hockey system is definitely unique. It's very cultural. As somebody who's from Texas, the way my dad likes to say it, it's like high school football, but in Finland, that's your national sport. Every city has its team, whether at various levels. And Chovan, who lives in Tampere, which is considered the cradle of Finnish hockey, has multiple hockey clubs within, and there's even Nokia, which has the namesake for Nokia Cellular, has its own team only like 5 minutes away. So Chovan played for Tappara, which is one of the major two hockey clubs there in Tampere. He's originally not Finnish. He's from Slovakia. And I think there's not a lot of information on his personal background, but the way I understand it is about 5 years ago, he reached the development peak of where he thought he could be. Not that Slovakia has different, but Finland is really known for their youth development. And so his dad, who's an ex-pro as well in the Euro leagues, opted for him to move to Tampere, which is a big hockey capital there in Finland, and Tappara, which is one of the clubs there. It has a great development system. So he joined that about 5 years ago in the U16 league at 14, 15. He joined 14, 15 years old and was automatically slotted in that U16 role. And then eventually the later part of that 21, 22 season got slotted into the U18 league. So he moved over there, came already with a lot of skill, and then just started over there and joined the Tappara system and has been developing quickly.
So now he's on the under 20 team.
Yes.
Which there's an under 16 and under 18 and under 20. Yeah. I'm not even going to try and get into that. My understanding is that he's a large player. Yeah. He's not, 6'8" or anything. He's 6'2", but that for his age, he is, more physically developed than most.
Mm-hmm. He's no Hellenius, who's like 6'6". He's
just for the record, there's no chance Hellenius is 6'6". I've stood next to that guy a billion times. That guy's 6'7" if he's an inch. That guy's huge. Anyway, sorry. That's a bugaboo of mine. He is huge.
Yeah. So Chovan is at 6'2". He's a big guy, 190 for a European guy. He's stocky. He sits as a right wing as well. And that's kind of the notable characteristic as well, is he's a big guy. But the funny thing about him is, despite being so big, you look at the Leon Bischel types who are really big and physical and pushy. But, that's the funny thing about Chovan. He's not a very physical guy, like in your face when, he's good at going in the boards. But the things that make him special is his ability to go into traffic and pull pucks off the boards, really great on the forecheck. He goes in there, skates with confidence, goes into high traffic systems and pulls pucks out. But he doesn't really use his body in those situations. He uses his stick. He creates that space. I think a lot of times with bigger players, especially in European leagues, is people give you a lot of space. You've got that reach, and he kind of uses that to his beneficial. But, watching his early games in the U20 system, you want to kind of get in there and be like, man, get some physicality. But in the Finnish leagues, especially, that's kind of the big point in, a lot of European leagues, but especially in Finnish leagues with forwards, you want them to be more aggressive and push on them. And so he's kind of benefited from that. His size, people give him a little bit more space that he can use that aggressive stick handling, get the puck. But I think as he transferred to OHL, that's going to be a big stepping up point for him, as he goes down there to Sudbury, he needs to be able to use his body, deal with a little bit more of the intensity from the North American leagues and get a little more physical. And I think that's what he's going to have to learn to get in there, because those guys in the OHL aren't going to give you that space. No matter how big you are, you're going to have to step in there and put a shoulder on him. So I think that's the big concern right now with his size is, you want him to use it. You got this weapon, you want him to use that.
How much under 20 Finnish hockey are you like? You're speaking very, and I'm not trying to
No,
question
you're
your
fine.
expertise, but like, I'm thinking, okay, there's under 16, there's under 18, there's under 20, and then there's Liga.
Yeah.
I barely have enough time to watch one team in the NHL.
Yeah.
Like, how much under 20, Finnish hockey are you watching?
So I write for the Hockey Writer, and what I try to do is when we have a focus, what I always try to do is look at the event we're covering, look at the topic I'm covering, and then I try to look at a player within that kind of wraps up. When we were writing on the World Junior Summer Showcase, Atos Koivu was the big guy, so I kind of try to look into it. And Finland has their own system like we do here in the States for beer league. We have our live barn system, and they have that set up on every rink basically that's out there. And you can even look down and see some U8 games, some kids playing, and they just have this huge database of games that you can watch, through the, subscription services they're paid for the government. They're, Finland's a really all in hockey place. And, it's a whole organization there. So when I cover these guys, like looking at, Hovan or Rimpinen, I'll go back and watch a backlog of their games. And most of the time I'll focus on one player and skip through, watch the whole game. And I'll try when I can to watch the whole game in the entirety, but most of the time I'll focus on the player when they're on the ice, focus on them, see how they're performing. And, that's where you get a lot of your watch. And as you're watching one player and taking notes in your scouting book, you'll see, it's like you're focusing, and when you're watching Hovan, you're kind of like, get in there, get a little physical. You see another guy on his team that's getting physical. And so you kind of jot down and, you get this like broad look at players. And so I think that's most of the time where I watch, the highlights of the players. I'll see who he's pairing with or who maybe on his team scored a goal. You'll get around. And so I guess U16, U18 is my favorite, age group, because you can see a lot of development there. You can kind of see that's where, when you're looking as a draft agent, who's going to be on the next draft list in the NHL, that's where you can kind of see the make or break time for them. The U18, U20 is more exciting. There's some things you can see there, but I normally watch it based on, Pitsi Tonas, which is a tournament that came out. I was focusing, or if I'm focusing on Nokia Puru, who is a Mestis league that's popping up. It just depends on what I'm covering and, the exposure to all that. I see the games around it. So I would love to give you an exact number, but it's just kind of
that's
scattered. It's scattered.
So the next question I have then is, you're talking about board play, and we've talked a little bit about this summer with, players who are trained in Europe. Mm-hmm. And one of the biggest arguments I've had that's been going on for years is with a guy who covers the Vegas Golden Knights. Mm-hmm. And he says it's dumb to say that playoff hockey is a different sport than regular season hockey. And I tell him he's dumb for saying that. Like it just is a different sport. Yeah. I get it. It's not a different sport, but it is officiated differently. The intensity is different. It changes. I have to believe that the North American rink versus the European rink is at least not dissimilar, comparison, because there's more space. So you're talking about board battles and using your size and everything. And like I said, we've talked about it this summer already, but how important are board battles to the European game? Because I think it might be one of the most underrated aspects of the North American game. People don't really talk about it. If you have a guy who wins 90% of his board battles, you've got yourself a player, but people go like, oh, well, he doesn't do anything. It's like, well, what are you watching? He wins his board battles. That's
No, I think that's something that North America really shines through. They're a lot more physical. The rink's tighter. It's a lot, those very narrow passes are important. You don't think how much that rink, but skated on European ice. It's kind of staggering to be on a North American ice rink and go out there. You see it a little bit on the TV, but it's a lot bigger. And, the Finnish culture of, how some of the Finnish players are raised in the development of the coaches. If there's a puck out there and, forward and defensemen are skating towards that puck, the Finnish way is kind of maybe as a forward to kind of skate back a little bit, maybe get in a better position. But the North American way would be to dive in there, fight for that puck, get that. And you kind of see that performing well. And when a lot of those Finnish players make that jump, the ones you'll see a lot of them that make that jump, jump in the OHL or the AHL or any of these North American leagues, and they kind of struggle with that down and dirty outline. And a lot of Swedish players, like you see that as well. Swedish players love a lot of space. They love a lot of the passing. And when you kind of choke down on them and put in that pressure, you see them kind of struggle. It's like they're out in the middle of the ocean with no life raft. You have to be a very creative player, know how to use your size to be able to deal with that change. And that's kind of what we're looking for Chovan, is he's a really high hockey intelligence player. He's always setting himself up, but you want to see when he makes that development and goes down to Sudbury, is he going to make that developmental jump and be able to handle the speed and size and use his mind to kind of make the click of, okay, I need to get a shoulder on this guy. I need to battle on the boards a little bit more. I'm curious to see if he'll make that connection there, and that's going to be the make or break for him on how he fits in with the Kings.
Totally unrelated. Have you ever seen videos of a sport called bandy?
Yes.
That's all I can think of during this conversation. For those who don't know, it's a game very similar to hockey, but I believe the rinks are 200 by 100. I mean, they're just preposterous. They're huge. It's a soccer field.
Yes.
And there's
massive.
like 20 guys just floating around and doing crazy stuff.
The engineer who brought hockey to Finland, that was kind of they had field bandy, and there was a lot of ice bandy. And when there was an engineer, I believe, in Tampere, which is where a lot of the Finnish hockey started. I think it was in the 60s or 80s. I think it was 60s. He had went to Canada, visited, and they were playing ice hockey. So he came back over and he was kind of like, everybody stop playing ice bandy. We need to switch over to hockey.
Every time I see a video of it, I'm like, well, this can't possibly be real. I don't know how you
poor goalie in those massive.
Well, that's the thing. Is like, I don't understand how you possibly get good at it. Like, it's
exactly
whatever. So Chovan is I believe set to, you referenced the Sudbury Wolves, make the translation. What are your, are you optimistic about his chances?
Right now, the big thing for him is, we were talking about the North American reading is, he really struggles with that explosiveness in his skating. You'll see him, and that's kind of his big, critiques that you see in a lot of, if you look up his elite prospect files and look at his scouting reports, you looked at any draft guides or any things, is you see his consistency is his big thing. And you'll see just these moments of just pure hockey genius that'll perform, of him setting it up and it all falling into place and him going through. And a lot of that is set up by his high hockey IQ and setting up. But the place that he struggles is, when it's just, you need to just do pure physicality, explosive speed, get to the puck kind of things. He kind of struggles in that space. And so I think if he goes down to Sudbury, does kind of the North American strength training, does some of that power edge work, and gets into that explosive level and makes that jump, he'll perform really well. But if he kind of goes and just can't put those things together, I think he has all the tools there with his size and his physicality. It's like all the raw tools are there. You just kind of need him to kind of like, when you're out on the rink and you practice all these skills, you kind of put them to work. And one of the things that makes a really good player say, okay, I need to work on this things. And then they can go off ice, work with coaches, work with trainers, and say, I need to work on those things. And then, work on those skills and then translate them to the ice. And that's a lot of moving pieces to go right. Takes either a really smart coach to kind of guide somebody and understands really well, or it takes a kind of Connor McDavid type person to really understand themselves well and go off the ice and practice those things. And so it's kind of a toss-up right now. I think after 1 year in the OHL, you'll start to see a lot. And you hate to say as a scout, like, oh, we'll see. But it's definitely, for Chovan, it's a good development step he's making. I think if I was his 5-year planner, I would say this is a step you need to go down to the CHL. The whole league, the OHL has, double the amount of games as European leagues. So he's going to get a lot of exposure, a lot of chance to work. And if he can kind of, make a name for himself, get the coach's attention, fit in well, he moved from a different country 5 years ago to Finland already. So he's used to adapting in these, changes, because that's a big change already, is moving countries, adapting to a whole new culture. So he already kind of has that culture ambassador mindset. If he can do that again in Canada, soak in a lot of things, figure out what he wants to do and make those connections, have a lot of hope for him. I think his high, ceiling of where he finishes out, I think he could be, a great middle six guy, work well on the second line for the power play and penalty kill. I think his floor is, bottom six in NHL, would take, 4 or 5 years to get there. I think either way it'd be a utility piece, but I think if he can really make those connections, that's a guy in 5 years that all the LA Kings are going to be just, man, Chovan's so reliable. Love to have him on my team. That's what I can see.
Well, obviously, you hope your 6th-round picks pan out.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
fingers crossed. Andrew Epps, thank you so much for your
Yeah.
time. Really appreciate
Thanks
it.
so much for having me.
The next player we're going to talk about, drafted in the 6th round, 184th overall, Ján Chovan. Have I got that right, Mark?
I'm not the best at
All
pronouncing
right,
names,
sure.
but yeah.
All right. He played in the under 20 Liga. I don't pretend to know how to say the name of that league, but he's slated to play for the Sudbury Wolves, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
When you draft a player in the 6th round and he plays, in that specified a league before you draft him, do you know before you pick him that he's committed to come over to North America? Is that part of what makes him appealing as a draft pick, or is that a conversation that happens after the draft?
It could be either. In this kid's case, he had we had talked to him twice as a group, and then obviously I talked to him more over in Europe. But in our 2 conversations with him as a group pre-draft, in each of those conversations, he had intimated that he was open to coming over and playing in Sudbury. And then the second conversation, it was similar, but it was little cheek to it. Like, it's something I'd consider, if the NHL team wanted me to go, wink, wink, I would go. Like, so it was in by the last time we talked to him, it wasn't done, but, it was certainly something that he was in the process of at least laying the groundwork to do, and then the NHL team wants him to do it. He's certainly going to do it. So we had a very good idea. That's something he wanted. It would have been something we wanted as well. With the Chahar situation, I could be convinced either way. With this situation, it would be more. I would be more steadfast in saying I would want to see this kid over here. I think he needs, with his size. I was surprised how big he was when we talked to him. How big his frame was. Like, it looks like he's going to be able to be a big kid, but he needs to work on being a primary offensive player while using his body over here. Over there, he could do parts of each. He could. Here he has to learn to play more of a North American style, use the body to find himself in better offensive positions, or to make himself have better offensive positions. He's got good straight line skating, good straight line rush ability. Just as I said, for him, it's more important for him to adjust his body and skills to the North American style now. I don't think he was ready to get to the Liga. I don't think it was there for him. So another year of junior over there. I mean, it's not awful, but it's certainly, for his development, we thought, and he thought, this is the best case scenario for him.
I gotta say, of all the players picked, I feel like this is the guy I know the least about, or feel like I know the least about. Talk about kind of the size skating combo, maybe to project like what could be added to that. Is that what was so appealing about him late in the draft? Just because I don't know, I feel like I just don't know much about this kid.
Yeah, as I said, he was someone, as I said, he's a later draft pick. So when you find the later draft picks, you're looking, as I said, the easiest thing to talk about is the 5-tool baseball player, right? Like, as I said, it lends itself to hockey. It's a little square peggish, but everybody gets what we're saying. So when you're getting to the 3rd, 4th, and 5th rounds, you're looking at 1 to 2 tools. You get to the 5th, 6th, 7th, you're looking at 1. So again, he had size, and as I said, you see the size, and then you talk to a kid after the game briefly. He's got his stuff on, but when we talked to him face to face, I was surprised at his frame. He was bigger than I thought he would. Like, he projects bigger than I thought. And again, the attribute I would say that would stand out. It's still not a defined quality, but as I said, his straight line skating, his rush based skating. He's able to build speed in the long course. So that was probably the one tool that you're you're kind of looking for. You're looking for a guy who has at least one tool. That would be it. He has a decent shot. It can always get better. He's got very good work ethic. He goes to hard areas. He'll battle. He checks, good checks and positional play. I don't know if he'll project as an offensive guy if he makes it, but as a more role playing defensive guy we think there'll be power in his stride. He's already got good long course skating. We think if he can add some power, then you can start to put some, he can make a play. He can shoot. He's got good skill. It's all secondary. It's all it's all the background element of his game. It's not none of them are defined, but size and skating in that lower role and adequate enough skill to contribute. Rather, you said you can now put some size in your lineup in the later stuff and still have a couple of NHL attributes.
You've had a few recent prospects play for the Sudbury Wolves, Quentin Byfield and Matthew Mania, without mentioning names of CHL franchises, because I don't want anybody to get themselves in trouble. If he were going anywhere other than the Sudbury Wolves, are there CHL teams that he could say to you, yeah, I'm going to go to team, X, Y, or Z, where you would say, you know what, maybe just stay in Finland?
Yeah. How do I not get myself in trouble?
Sorry.
Well, no.
Probably by not answering the question.
I can ask a different question if you want.
You know what? You know what? Yeah, I can sit here and not answer questions or give. I try not to. I try not to give.
I just don't want you to say like the Moncton Wildcats are the worst or something.
I wouldn't. No, I wouldn't. I would never say that. I try to make it. I try. Here's how I'll answer it. We don't actively steer guys to certain places or not. Like when a kid wants to come out of school, if we don't think it's in his best interest, we say, listen, I think you should stay. But we're not in the taking kids out of school business. We're not except in rare instances. And I'll say it here. We're not in the directing guys where to go, except in rare instances. If he was going somewhere that he shouldn't go to, and there are places like that in both Canadian junior and US junior, we would make sure that he went somewhere else. But that is very rare that we would get involved there. But if it was one of those doomsday scenarios, and there are places like that, just like they're at the top of the league, there are bad places to go. We would make sure that he doesn't end up in the wrong place. But that is, when I say rare, I am talking, not quite Haley's Comet rare, but rare.
Maybe in private someday you'll tell us where the bad place is. But all right, the next player drafted that we're going to talk about was taken in the 6th round, 184th overall, Ján Chovan. Strengths listed are hockey sense, defensive presence, deception and creativity, and maturity. We've used that word a lot, I feel like, talking about the previous picks. Under construction, improvements to make skating, using his size more effectively, and limiting turnovers. We're now into the 6th round, Scott. We're at 184 overall. How strong are your opinions about players taken at this point in the draft to begin with?
They aren't. There were a few players taken in round 6 and 7 in this year's draft that I had in my top 100 and that I liked. There were a couple of players who went undrafted in this year's draft that I had in my top 100 and liked. But even in building my own top 100, and people would be surprised how short NHL lists are. Some NHL lists are as low as 80 players long. Others are closer to 120. NHL teams are not ranking 224 players when they build a list. And Chovan was a kid who was kind of nibbling at the edges, if you will, of my top 100 when I went through the process. I did a list of 30 honorable mentions and scouting reports on those 30 honorable mentions after the release of my top 100. And Ján was one of those players who I sort of dove in on a little bit. He's a good player. He was expected to have a better year last year than he did. He is in this Slovak 2007 age group viewed as as sort of one of the better players within the age group, but he didn't really pop with Tapara, who is the top team and has won 2 of the last few Liga titles, and it can be harder to climb the ranks within not just their pro club with Tapara, but also the U20 team. He was a good player there. He wore a letter there. He was productive, but he didn't dominate. He was very good at U18 Worlds for them and wore a letter again at U18 Worlds for them. He was a part of Slovakia's World Junior team and will be a returnee for them next year. He's committed next year to playing in Sudbury, who own his rights via the import draft, the CHL import draft. So he'll play in the OHL next year. I'll be really, really interested to see what Ján looks like in the OHL next year, because I do think there's some risk that he just becomes a good player at that level and maybe doesn't get signed, doesn't get an NHL contract, doesn't sort of take it to the next level. But I think there's also a chance that he becomes a really strong, sturdy 6'2", 6'3" forward at the OHL level who can impose himself and who takes a step. Not the quickest player, not the most creative player, but has a good feel for the game, good offensive instincts. And I do think he has more to offer than we saw at the U20 level in Finland last year.
Scott, when reading your, evaluation of the Kings draft, you said you have time for Ján Chovan, which I imagine means that in the 6th round, there's going to be flaws, right? You're not finding a perfect player in the 6th round, but you can probably see some kind of a path that if things break right, you're saying, okay, this is his path to maybe becoming an NHL player if things go well. I imagine that's the case, here where it's probably not like, okay, it's obvious, but like, yeah, if he takes the right steps, you could see why this guy was taken here and how he could develop into a player.
Yes, exactly. And I think he's at the very least going to play pro hockey and have a career as a pro hockey player, which even in the 6th round, I think is a positive. Even if you get an AHL depth player, if he becoms a 3rd line AHLer for you, I don't think that's a lost pick. Every team needs organizational depth. It matters having good players who are good kids playing within your AHL organization. And there are kids who are drafted in the 6th and 7th round who I don't think have any chance of playing pro hockey at least at an AHL level. And Jan's a player who I think has a very realistic chance to become that level of player. And then from there, sometimes guys just have really good AHL careers and they play 50 or 75 or 100 games in the NHL over the course of their careers, and they get a few call-ups. Maybe a call-up breaks right and you get a coach who really likes you and you carve out a little bit of a niche for yourself for a few years. I think that's ultimately not a bad career path to be pursuing in drafting players in the 6th and 7th round. And I think that's a realistic potential outcome for Ján, even if he's a bit of a long shot given where he was taken.
At 6'2" or 6'3", depending, how much of that, one of the talking points of the draft was, oh my God, everybody's super tall. Yeah. Or at least nobody taken is under 6 feet. And I don't have the numbers on that. And I don't know if that was just limited to the 1st round, but how much of his,
no defenseman under 6 feet.
Yeah. How much of his projection is tied directly to his height?
I think there's a little bit of that. I think you would like to see a little bit more skill, a little bit more production out of a player of his size at the Finnish U20 level, given what that league looks like. Players who come out of that league and make it to the NHL almost always dominate that level. Ján didn't dominate that level this year, so you start to wonder about that. But you've seen just enough with the national team, with the Slovak national team at U18s and at the World Juniors to think, okay, maybe this kid's a legit player in this age group, and that's enough to take a kid. But certainly part of it's the size. I think the league just wants to get bigger right now. Almost every scout I talk to feels that that's the way that this is going, that teams have watched the way that the St. Louis Blues were built when they won their Stanley Cup, and the way that the Vegas Golden Knights were built when they won their Stanley Cup, and the way that the Tampa Bay Lightning even were built. Now, the Tampa Bay Lightning had some exceptions with Cirelli and Point and Kucherov and some premium guys, but you look at that blue line, whether it was Chernak or you go down the list, obviously Perbix the last couple of years. there has been a premium placed by the top organizations in the league. Certainly in Florida, you look at the way that blue line was built and the way that they were built heavy on their bottom six. They actually started the playoffs last year with a bit of a lighter mix on their bottom six, with more skilled types like Maki Samoskevich, a former first-round pick, as a part of their bottom six. And as the playoffs got longer and deeper, the Florida Panthers, what did they do? They switched to the really, really heavy fourth line types, and the guys who were in and out of the lineup suddenly became the really bigger, heavier, stronger guys that stuck around. So rightly or wrongly, I think that's the way this is going, and it doesn't hurt a player like Chovan in terms of his likelihood of getting signed, just because he has that element. And if you can work with the rest, sometimes you can develop those guys into players.